Hello, this is that other Anne Shirley. You know, from Anne with a D, the story of a transsexual Anne Shirley who rises to the ranks of Prime Minister before being ritually murdered by the Queen. We all know nothing can get through to the mainstream media without being about transsexuality these days. So let's get back to it. The real Anne of Green Gables, Kappo and The Rev.
Well, thank you, fake Anne, from a product far below the quality which Kappo and The Rev have come to expect of their production of Anne of Green Gables. This is Chapter 8, Anne's Upbringing is Begun.
For reasons best known to herself, Marilla did not tell Anne on whether or not she was to stay at Green Gables. Marilla had put Anne through her paces when it came to chores and upkeep, and she had been taken aback by the child's ability to learn quickly, but there was something very disconcerting about this child, and a final decision would have to wait.
Anne's biggest shortcoming seemed to be her inability to keep herself from slipping into daydreams that bordered on agnosticism. Tasks would go half done, and then Marilla would find Anne speaking to a vase full of freshly picked cherry blossoms. Anne would flit from complete obedience to some sort of impenetrable dream world, and that bothered Marilla greatly.
Anne was busy at her task of doing the nightly dishes when she turned not to Marilla, but back to that vase of cherry blossoms and asked,
"Oh, do you suppose that Marilla will let me stay at Green Gables?"
She then whispered under her voice,
"I know Matthew is keen enough on me." Marilla scoffed from across the room. She was used to being passed over when it came to conversation, but she'd never lost out to a vase full of flowers. Perhaps Mrs. Peter Blewett or Mrs. John Blythe, but this was a new low. In her budding anger and fluttering chest, Marilla commanded,
"You haven't finished scalding the dishcloth in hot water. If you're going to stay at Green Gables, you'll stay on task and stop frittering away comments to flowers stolen from my garden." Marilla took the vase of flowers from the windowsill and went to toss them in the waste bin, but Anne, with the shadow of Mrs. Hammond in her mind, interjected,
"Oh, Marilla, please don't. Send me away instead, not these beautiful flowers. I am so sorry that I picked them. I've been feeling the guilt all evening, and that's why I feel such a need to speak with them, for they only have hours left to bloom."
"I'll leave these blossoms be, but only if you set to task and stop with these infernal daydreamings."
Anne watched as the cherry blossoms seemed to wilt, and they fell from the windowsill. But by some miracle, the glass didn't break. Marilla snapped her neck sideways and demanded an explanation.
"What are you doing now, you little witch of a child?"
"They fell all by themselves, Marilla. I didn't touch them. I didn't even say a word. I was scalding the dishcloth and they—"
"I've heard everything short of pure witchcraft come out of your mouth tonight, child. I don't know whether we'll keep you, send you back, or send you to that rancorous Mrs. Peter Blewett."
Marilla was nearly exhausting herself, and that last comment about Matilda Blewett was positively cruel. Marilla knew that by this point she was on the wrong side of the Lord's good graces, so she changed course.
"I'm not going to put you out of doors tonight. You will stay here at Green Gables, but you're going to have to learn to cease these feather-brained ways of yours." Anne stopped shuddering in fear and started shuddering in joy.
"Oh, Miss Cuthbert, thank you! What am I to call you now? Can I call you Aunt Marilla?"
"No, you may not."
"May I call you Auntie Cordelia?"
"No!"
Marilla shouted, alerting Matthew, who was doing his best to mind his own business as he read the daily paper in the parlor. "Can't you imagine that you are my aunt?"
"No, I cannot. I do not like calling people by names that are not their own."
"Oh, don't you ever imagine things that are different from the way they really are?"
Anne asked, bewildered and a little saddened at Marilla's lack of imagination. "I see things as God created them to be, nothing more and nothing less. You may call me just plain Marilla."
Marilla's only imaginings were that of the hellfire and brimstone that awaited those who didn't heed God's call to be present and sober-minded. "Oh, Marilla, how much you miss."
It was then that Matthew entered the room unannounced. He would normally never enter into a conversation as tense as this one, but he needed to stretch his legs, as while he was sitting in the parlor he began to suffer chest pains and a touch of arrhythmia after listening to the exchange.
"How are you doing, Anne?" Well, Matthew, my cherry blossoms, Marilla's cherry blossoms are beginning to wither upon the vine.
Anne said morosely.
Oh, I know how they feel,
Matthew said with a smile as he excused himself, patting Anne on the head just before one of his patented rafter-rattling flatulences. When the rafters at Green Gables stopped rattling, Anne and Marilla peered at each other and attempted not to laugh, to no avail. The tension had been cut along with the cheese. Marilla offered Anne a fresh cut of Colby.
So, are there any little girls who live near me here at my new home at Green Gables?
You are the most presumptuous child. But yes, Diana Barry lives just down the way from here at Barry's farm.
Oh, do you think that Diana and I would be bosom friends? Marilla looked startled at Anne, covered her chest with her shawl, and answered,
A what kind of friend?
Oh, a bosom friend, a very close one, an intimate friend who I could share my very soul with. And if I happened to catch a glimpse of her milk-white bosom, she wouldn't even mind.
Marilla tried to shake the vision of Rachel Lynde's large, imposing breasts that admittedly she had caught a glimpse of on a few occasions. It's not all it's cracked up to be. Trust me.
Oh, you must tell me about Diana. Is she pretty?
Well, I'm sure she'll be as pretty as all the berries,
Marilla stated with an obvious touch of jealousy. Oh, I am ever so happy that she's a pretty girl.
Anne beamed.
It's such a curse to be smart rather than to be pretty, don't you think, Marilla?
Why would I know anything about it?
Marilla stated, turning red and looking over her shoulder at the switch she'd cut out days before.
Anne, who was much smarter than she was pretty, decided that things had gone far enough for a time.
How about I head up to my room now, Marilla?
Marilla felt entirely crestfallen as the next words out of her mouth was going to be a bold-faced command for the child to march up to her room without another word. Yes, be quick about it.
Yes, Marilla. Several hours passed, and Marilla had readied herself for bed, said her evening prayers, and then some. She then went across the hallway and stopped short of knocking on the door when she heard Anne speaking to someone.
Marilla worried that perhaps Angus Iverson had once again climbed the trellis and was corrupting Anne with his talk of the world, but this was something else entirely.
Yes, Katie, this place is to be my new home, and you are always welcome here. Marilla had silently opened the door and entered to see Anne knelt at the window speaking to her own reflection.
Who is welcome here?
Marilla had all sorts of wonders. Perhaps this child was summoning the presence in the room that Marilla had often felt. Oh, it's just my window friend, Marilla.
A what kind of friend?
My window friend, Katie Morris. I first discovered her in the window of the parlor closet at the Hammonds. It was the last piece of glass not smashed by an intoxicated Mr. Hammond.
I do not approve of you having window friends. It sounds positively demonic,
Marilla said as she approached Anne and kindly beckoned her to bed.
Now please, child, let's end this day with the Lord's Prayer.
Yes, Marilla,
Anne said with love bubbling up from her soft green eyes.
After Marilla had heard Anne adequately say her prayers, she tucked her in and then blew out the candle by the bedside.
Marilla walked over to the window and drew the sash. As the curtains fell across the window, Marilla saw the face of Katie Morris peer back at her. The hairs on Marilla's arms stood tall as she peered back into the window and caught a glimpse of Anne Shirley's dream world.